So there's currently a really easy way to get a handful of pretty good pieces of loot, including a piece of gear on the hero track. And this is only going to be able to be done this week because it's part of this week's time walking. Now, first off, there's two quests you're going to want to pick up that you're going to be able to complete very quickly. First being a burning path through time, which you can pick up in Dornegal or through the adventure guide. And this is going to want you to defeat 5 time walking raid bosses or dungeons. And this is going to give you a cache of Nerubian treasures, which is going to give you any Nerubar Palace raid piece from the normal version of the raid. Now on this cache, it says the item will be 597, but it can be any item from the raid. And we'll go over why that's pretty important and why you can get some very good items from that. And then for the second quest, you're going to want to head to Shatrath and you're going to pick up the Disturbance Detected Black Temple. And this is going to want you to basically just defeat Illidan. You're also going to have to loot an item from Illidan as well. And this is going to give you some time warp badges, but this is also going to give you a cache with a random piece of hero track gear from Black Temple. So to complete both of these quests, all you're going to need to do is go into the group finder and look for a group for Black Temple time walking. There's tons of groups going. And even if you're doing the entirety of Black Temple, you should be able to get it done in probably a half an hour. A majority of your time in there is actually just traveling, walking around because that raid is so massive. Now you could also potentially save some time if you get in a raid that say has a lockout for Illidan or has a lockout for a handful of end bosses, but you're still going to want to make sure you get 5 raid bosses completed. Or if you get in a group that say has a lockout just for Illidan, then you could also go do some additional time walking dungeons to get the first quest completed. So now let's go over the loot you could be getting from this. So first off, the weekly that wants you to either complete 5 time walking dungeons or defeat 5 time walking raid bosses will give you a piece of champion track gear from normal mode Nerubar Palace. Now champion track gear starts at 597 item level and can go up to 619. And depending on what boss the piece of gear you get comes from, that piece of gear will be more or less upgraded into the champion track. So the first boss will be 597, but the final boss would be like 606. Now on top of just being able to get any of the normal pieces of raid loot, you can also get these super rare drops from the raid. And in fact, on my shaman, I got the super rare ring from the final boss of the raid. So I got Seal of the Poisoned Pack, and this starts at I think 613 item level, and I think it was 6 or 7 out of 8 on the champion track. So this starts at a much higher item level within the champion track than pretty much every other item in the raid does. So even though this is a piece of normal raid loot, this is a ultra rare drop, so it's incredibly strong at a baseline, and 619 item level, so having a piece of normal raid loot fully upgraded is still a pretty high item level right now. And like always, a lot of the best in-slot items do come from the raid and are specific raid drops, so even though this is a normal piece of gear, you could still get a best in-slot piece for your spec, and you could just upgrade it and that would still be incredibly strong until you get something that's a bit higher item level. And the second quest that has you go defeat Illidan in the time walking version of Black Temple will give you a piece of hero track gear, which starts at 610 and can be upgraded to 626. So this is a heroic item level piece of loot. This is incredibly high item level for pretty much any part in the season. Unless you're someone that's like full mythic rating or you've been doing the highest tier of mythic plus for the entirety of the season, most people are going to be sitting at hero track gear even if they've been playing a lot. So this is really good gear to get this early, especially when it will only take like 30 or 45 minutes to actually get this. Now what's really interesting about this is that this hero track piece of gear is a random piece of loot from Black Temple, just at a much higher item level. So not only are you just going to be getting a really high item level piece of gear, but you could get some pretty cool items that may be incredibly strong. One of the first ones I thought of is the Madness of the Betrayer trinket, which is a trinket that gives you either agility or strength. So a main stat is already super good on trinkets, but the equip effect is your melee and range attacks have a chance to increase your critical strike by some amount for 10 seconds. And this gives you a lot of critical strike. So even just a trinket like this, which is basically just a stat stick, gives you some main stats and has a pretty good proc on it. This could be really strong compared to all of the War Within specific loot. And obviously, since Black Temple is a big raid with a lot of bosses, there's a lot of loot in there, so you have a really low chance to get any specific piece. But even if it's just a random piece of gear with normal stats on it, that's still a heroic track piece of gear. And you can even get things like weapons. On my Paladin, I got a two-handed weapon, so it starts at 610. That would have been really nice if I didn't already craft my embellished two-handed weapon, but this is pretty much going to be the easiest hero track piece of gear you can currently get. Now, on top of these two caches, while running Black Temple, every single one of the bosses in there is going to be dropping champion track gear as well. So they start at 597 and go up to 619, the exact same item levels as the Narubar Palace raid on normal difficulty. Now, I don't think any of the items in Black Temple have a higher starting item level, so if you get a piece of gear from there that you actually want to use, you would have to upgrade it all the way from rank 1 up to rank 8 if you wanted it at its maximum item level. But again, there are a bunch of items in there that have pretty interesting effects or procs that could be really strong. And I don't think there's any like build guides or anything that have any of these Black Temple items within them. So some of these may be really strong without a lot of people knowing how strong they actually are. And you can go do this on every single one of your characters. And since it's time walking, the raid is still pretty easy. Pretty much every raid you join into is just going to invite pretty much as many people as they can. And you're really not going to be wiping on any boss. So even if your character isn't super geared, you shouldn't have much difficulty getting into this raid, completing those two quests, and coming out with at minimum 2 pieces of gear and most likely 3 or more pieces of gear. So if you also have some undergeared alts, this is going to be incredibly strong for giving them some quick and easy pieces of loot. But that's all I want to go over. So thanks for